Good morning and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. My name is Bhante Suddhāso, and I will be looking at the second part of the sutta that we began yesterday, the Apaṇṇaka Sutta. So I'll start with paying homage to the Buddha, and then I'll read through the discourse and give some explanations as I go along. And if there's any questions, I'll respond to questions at the end. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So, as mentioned, this is Majjhima Nikāya number 60, the Apaṇṇaka Sutta, the sutta on the incontrovertible or undeniable or unfailing teaching. And yesterday we had gone through the first three sections where the Buddha is giving an example of three kinds of wrong view which were prevalent at that time. So two which were rejecting the existence of right and wrong, saying that there's no point in doing good deeds or bad deeds, then there's no afterlife, so it doesn't matter anyway. And then the third wrong view, which is saying that there is an afterlife, but there's no such thing as causality. That choice is an illusion, and then therefore it doesn't matter what you do because you're not in control anyway. So the Buddha then rejected these three views and talked about how somebody who takes on those views will naturally then tend to engage in immoral conduct, immoral behavior, and cultivate the causes and conditions for harmful rebirth, for unpleasant conditions both in this life and in future lives. Then the next section that the Buddha starts with, so he's talking to this group of householders about these different kinds of wrong views. So this next one, let me find the place. So we had just been through the one on causality. Here's the next one. So the Buddha gives the next one. He says, there are some contemplatives and Brahmins who have this doctrine in view. There is no incorporeal existence. There's nothing incorporeal. So nothing without a physical form. So this takes a little bit of explanation. So in Pali it's three words, nati sabbaso arupa. So nati means there is not, or it doesn't exist. So nati, there is not. Sabbaso means completely or entirely, totally. And arupa means without a rupa, without a physical form. So nati sabbaso arupa means there's nothing which is completely non-physical. There's nothing which is completely incorporeal. And so this is pointing then at the view of materialism. The belief that only physical things are real, that only the tangible physical things that can be directly touched with one's body are real. That there's nothing which is outside the physical, there's nothing which is non-physical. So this is a fairly common belief these days. So the belief in secular materialism, for example, the belief that there's only the physical world and nothing else. Relatively common belief these days, but it's interesting that it was also a belief which was present during the time of the Buddha. So it's not something which is new or unique to the modern era, but it's an example of a wrong view which has existed throughout recorded history. So, of course, the view in Buddhism is that there is the mind, and the mind is something which is not physical. So the mind is something which has the ability to interact with physical things, but it is not itself physical. And in fact, the Buddha described states of being realms of rebirth in which there exists only a mind, in which one can exist as a disembodied mind, a mind which has no physical body at all. And in fact, these are described as being the highest of the heaven realms, the most pleasant and peaceful states of existence in samsara. For unawakened being, the most pleasant and peaceful states of existence are the ones in which you have no physical body, in which one exists solely as a disembodied mind, as an incorporeal being. So this is targeting then the belief that there is nothing incorporeal, there's nothing non-physical, only physical things are real. Reality is composed solely of physical phenomena. Now, what makes this a little bit confusing is that in both Bhante Sujato's translation and in Bhante Bodhi's translation, this line is translated a little bit loosely. So again, Nati Sabaso Arupa literally means there is nothing completely incorporeal, nothing entirely non-physical. Bhante Sujato translated this as, there are no totally formless states of meditation, which is a little bit too inferential. So this line doesn't mention meditation at all. So there are what are called the Arupa Samapati, the meditation attainments in which one completely loses the experience of one's physical body. And so for a period of time, because of the development of meditative concentration, one's body disappears and one has the temporary experience of being a disembodied mind. But that's just a meditation state, and when it ends, then you reestablish contact with your body. So those are called the Arupa Samapati, the samadhi states, concentration states in which one's body disappears. And Bhante Bodhi translates this line, so Nati Sabaso Arupa, which again literally means there's nothing completely incorporeal, there's nothing entirely non-physical. Bhante Bodhi translates this as, there are definitely no immaterial realms. So this is taking this view as specifically refuting the existence of the states of rebirth in which one is a disembodied mind, in which one is reborn as a mind-only being. Which again is too narrow of a translation of this line. It's touching on one aspect of it, but it's too restrictive. So both of these translations are too restrictive. They're not quite catching the meaning of what the Buddha is saying here. So again, the wrong view the Buddha is targeting here is the wrong view of materialism, the wrong view of believing that only physical things are real, that reality is composed solely of tangible physical phenomena. Carrying on, the Buddha says, there are some contemplatives and Brahmins who have this doctrine in view. There's nothing that is completely incorporeal. And he says there are some contemplatives and Brahmins whose doctrine directly contradicts this. And they say, there is that which is completely incorporeal. So there are things which are not physical. There are things which are incorporeal, which don't have any physical substance and yet nonetheless are real. So the Buddha says, what do you think, householders? Don't these doctrines directly contradict each other? And they reply, yes, Bhante. And the Buddha says, a sensible person reflects on this matter in this way. Some contemplatives and Brahmins say that there is nothing completely non-physical, but I have not seen that. And some contemplatives and Brahmins say that there is that which is completely non-physical, but I have not known that. Without knowing or seeing, it would not be appropriate for me to take one side and declare, this is the only truth, everything else is futile. So this is an interesting thing here, is that the Buddha is actually initially pointing out, like if you don't have actual direct experience of the truth, then it's inappropriate to take a firm stance on one side or the other. So you have one person who's saying only physical stuff is real, there's nothing non-physical, and somebody else is saying, oh, there absolutely are things which are completely non-physical, real things which have no physical substance. But if you can say, well, actually I don't know for myself, I don't know for sure which is right or wrong, then it's not actually reasonable to take a side. It's not reasonable to throw all your conviction behind something which you're not certain about. So this is a quite reasonable standpoint. So the Buddha continues, saying that one should reflect. If those contemplatives and Brahmins who say that there is nothing totally incorporeal are correct, says, it is possible that I will be unfailingly reborn among the gods who are formed and made of mind. If those contemplatives and Brahmins who say that there is that which is completely incorporeal are correct, it is possible I will be unfailingly reborn among the gods who are formless and made of perception. So this is interesting. Let me look at how Bhante Bodhi translated this. So Bhante Bodhi translates this line as to the contemplatives and Brahmins who hold the doctrine in view, there definitely are no immaterial realms. If their word is true, then it is certainly still possible that I might reappear among the gods of the fine material realms who consist of mind. But as to the contemplatives and Brahmins who hold the doctrine in view, there definitely are immaterial realms. If their word is true, then it is certainly possible that I might reappear among the gods of the immaterial realms who consist of perception. Okay. So the distinction here is that, so the first category of rebirth is among the highest of the Deva realms where one still has a physical body. Bhante Sujatra's translation here is a bit confusing. So the Pali is Deva Rupino Manomaya. So Deva means divinity, demigod, celestial being. Rupino means having a physical body. So Rupino, possessed of a physical form. And Manomaya means made of mind, or made by the mind. So this is referring to the highest of the Deva realms in which one still has a physical body, but that physical body is entirely constructed and controlled by the mind. So there's still a physical body, there's still a physical form, but the mind is completely dominant over it. The mind is in full control of it. Whereas the second case is being reborn as Deva Arupino Sanyamaya. So Devas, which are Arupino, they have no physical form at all, so completely incorporeal. And Sanyamaya means made of perception. In other words, again, even their mental form is something which they have direct control over. It's constructed entirely of their own way of looking at things. Their own way of relating to or identifying their experience is what generates their reality. So the distinction here is they're saying that if it's true that there's nothing incorporeal, then I can still be reborn as the highest of the corporeal devas. And if it's true that there is that which is incorporeal, then I could be reborn as an incorporeal deva, as a entirely non-physical deva. And given the example that's given here, so the example of rebirth in either the highest of the material realms or in the immaterial realms, it's understandable why Bhante Bodhi chose to translate the line Nati Sabaso Arupa as there are no immaterial realms, because that's the example that the Buddha gives. But again, it's important to understand the line itself actually has a broader statement. It's about the view of rejecting anything which is non-physical. It's not only talking about realms of rebirth. So the sutta continues. Again, this is the contemplation of someone who's hearing these two different viewpoints being presented and is considering its implications. So they've considered the implication of like, well, even if there's nothing entirely incorporeal, then one could still be reborn as the most refined and subtle form of existence, which is the fine material devas with full mental control of their body. And if it is true that there's that which is entirely incorporeal, then one could be reborn as a mind-only deva. So this person continues, they say, now, owing to form, bad things are seen. Taking up the rod and the sword, quarrels, arguments and disputes, accusations, divisive speech, and lies. But those things do not exist where it is completely formless. Reflecting like this, they simply practice for disillusionment, dispassion, and cessation regarding forms. So, this is reflecting on the fact that the physical world, so where we have physical bodies and interact with other physical bodies, that creates the conditions for violence, for hostility, for dispute, for fighting. But when one is free of the physical world, then one is not subject to the hostility and violence of the physical world. So this is a way of reflecting on the drawbacks of being trapped in a physical body, the drawbacks of being stuck in the physical world, is that it puts us in harm's way. It puts us in the opportunity to experience some of the more unpleasant aspects of samsara, such as given here as violence. So it says, reflecting thus, then one practices for nibbida, disenchantment, viraga, dispassion, and nirodha, cessation, for physical forms. So cultivating a disinterest in having a physical body, disinterest in having physical experience. So this is one aspect of Buddhist practice, is that we're working on dropping our desire and attachment for anything whatsoever. But usually we start with the more coarse things. So dropping our desire and attachment for coarse sensuality, which is connected with the body, and working towards more and more refined relinquishment from that point. So starting with the most coarse and obvious forms of desire and attachment, and then we progress to more subtle things. And desire and attachment for physical experience is one of the most blatant and direct forms of desire and attachment that we can see. So it's natural to begin with that. Then the next wrong view that the Buddha goes into, so he says, there are some contemplatives and Brahmins who have this doctrine in view. There is no such thing as the total cessation of continued existence. So the Pali line here is Nati Sabaso Bhava Nirodho, which Bhante Bodhi translated as, there is definitely no cessation of being. So again, Nati means there is not, Sabaso means completely or entirely, and Bhava Nirodho, so Bhava means being or existence. In some contexts it also has the meaning of self-identity, self-existence, or the ego, the sense of separateness. And nirodha means cessation or ending. So one of the things that we're working towards in Buddhist practice is the cessation of self-identity, the cessation of self-centeredness, the cessation of this fixation on ongoing independent individual existence, this constant desire of I am, I want to be someone, I want to be something. So this is bhava tanha. So bhava tanha is the craving for ongoing self-existence, the craving to have something which we can call me and mine, the craving to be able to say I am this, I am that. This is who I am, this is what I am. So then bhava nirodho is recognizing that there actually is the possibility for this self-centered state of affairs to come to an end. There actually is the possibility for this persistent cycle of self-identity and self-centeredness to stop. This is something which is achievable, and in fact, it's one of the things that that's right at the heart of Buddhist practice. Something that ultimately leads to the complete ending of suffering. So, with the ending of self-identity, of self-centered existence, then there's the ending of all suffering. So again, the Buddha says, there are some contemplatives and Brahmins who have this doctrine in view. There is no such thing as bhava nirodha. So in other words, there's no way to come to the ending of self-centered existence, of this fixation on self. And the Buddha says, and there are some contemplatives and Brahmins whose doctrine directly contradicts this and say there actually is such a thing as bhava nirodha. There is such a thing as the cessation of self-centered existence. And he says, what do you think, householders? Don't these doctrines directly contradict each other? And they say, yes, Bhante, so as before. And he says, a sensible person reflects on this matter in this way. Some contemplatives and Brahmins say that there is no such thing as bhava nirodha, but I have not seen that. Some say that there is such a thing as bhava nirodha, but I have not known that. Without knowing or seeing, it would not be appropriate for me to take one side and declare, this is the only truth, anything else is futile. So as with the previous wrong view, it's this recognition of like, oh, there are these two camps, these two belief systems that people have, but I actually don't know for sure yet. I haven't yet confirmed one or the other through my own direct experience. So what's to be done? Well, the contemplation continues. The person says, if those contemplatives and Brahmins who say that there is no such thing as the total cessation of bhava nirodha, of self-centered existence, if they're correct, it is still possible that I will be reborn among the gods who are incorporeal and made of perception. So in other words, they're saying like, well, even if it's impossible to completely put an end to self-centered existence, well, I could still be reborn in the most refined, pleasant, and peaceful form of self-existence. That's not too bad. But they say, if those contemplatives and Brahmins who say that there is such a thing as the total cessation of bhava nirodha are correct, it is possible that I will attain full enlightenment in this very life. And the view of those contemplatives and Brahmins who say that there is no such thing as bhava nirodha is close to greed, attachment, relishing, clinging, and grasping. And the view of those contemplatives and Brahmins who say that there is such a thing as bhava nirodha is close to non-greed, non-attachment, non-relishing, non-clinging, and non-grasping. Reflecting like this, they simply practice for disillusionment, dispassion, and cessation regarding existence, regarding bhava. So, to explain a little bit what the Buddha is talking about here, so again, it's saying that, so there's these two possibilities. So one is saying that there's the belief that we're always going to have self-centered existence, we're always going to be carrying on in this first-person oriented way of relating to reality. I am this, I am that, this is who I am, this is me, this is mine. So for the people who say that, well, the Buddha is saying that's a view which is in the proximity of desire and attachment and grasping. So it's something which is, it's a viewpoint which is based upon attachment to self-identity. It's based upon desire for ongoing existence. Which means it's still rooted in suffering. It's still rooted in the continued experience of dukkha. Whereas those who say that there is such a thing as the cessation of self-centered existence, that's coming from non-greed, non-attachment, non-grasping. It's coming from a way of relating to reality, which is saying actually there is a way to eliminate entirely our suffering. There is a way to completely eliminate our desires and delusions so that we can attain full enlightenment even in this very life. Without even waiting for a future rebirth, we can attain full enlightenment here and now. And so when one considers this, it's like, well, even if full enlightenment is impossible, even if there's no way to completely shed this prison of self-identity, well, then we can still at least have a really nice rebirth in a future life. But if it is possible to completely shed this prison of self-identity and attain full enlightenment in this life, then it's worth trying. So regardless of which viewpoint is actually ultimately correct, it's still worth trying. As long as there's the possibility in mind that there could be freedom from the prison of self-identity, it's worth putting forth the effort. It's worth making the attempt. And also, in the course of making the attempt, then one is diminishing one's desire, attachment, and delusion, which means one will experience a more pleasant experience in this life as well, because one's mind will be more pure and peaceful. So that's the end of the section on wrong views. And then the next section, the Buddha talks about 4 kinds of people. So the Buddha says, householders, these 4 people are found in the world. What for? 1, a person who torments themselves and is committed to the practice of tormenting themselves. A person who torments others, committed to the practice of tormenting others. A person who torments both themselves and others. And finally, the 4th is a person who does not torment either themselves or others, committed to the practice of neither tormenting self nor other, and who lives without wishes in this very life, quenched, cooled, experiencing bliss, with self become divine. So Bhante Bodhi translates this as, one is here now hungerless, extinguished and cooled, and abides experiencing bliss, having oneself become holy. So again, the 4 kinds of people, and the Buddha says, what's the first one? What's the person who torments themselves? And he says it's when a person goes naked, ignoring conventions, and then he gives a long list of many of the ascetic practices which were common in the time of the Buddha. I'm not going to go through the whole list, but it's a very long list of different forms of ascetic practices that people would do. Extreme restrictions around food, practices of not bathing or wearing the most uncomfortable forms of clothing, such as clothing made from bark or horsehair, or sitting under the hot sun in the middle of summer. There's a whole variety of different ways that people came up with of tormenting themselves, of inflicting physical suffering on themselves. And this is because at that time in ancient India, there was a belief that this was a way of building up spiritual power, a way of burning off one's defilements and cultivating spiritual power. And of course, the Buddha eventually came to the conclusion that those practices were not effective, that they were not actually a way towards complete enlightenment. So he gave up the ascetic practices and instead committed himself to meditation, leading eventually to awakening. So this is the first one. So again, the person who torments themselves is the one who practices extreme asceticism. So constantly just inflicting more and more pain and misery on their own body. The second one, he says, what is the person who torments others? And he says it's when a person is a butcher of sheep, pigs, poultry, or deer, a hunter or a fisher, a bandit, an executioner, a butcher of cattle, a jailer, or has some other cruel livelihood. So this is somebody who spends their life harming or torturing or killing other sentient beings. And you'll notice most of the examples he gives are actually people who are tormenting or killing animals. So people who are engaged in animal farming or hunting or fishing. These are all examples of people who torture others for a livelihood. But he also includes executioners and jailers, so people who are engaged in the punishment of criminals. So again, even if one justifies it as being good for society or necessary in society, then nonetheless one is still cultivating bad karma by tormenting other people. Then the third one, so one who torments both oneself and others. And here he gives the example, he says, it's when a person is an anointed aristocratic king or a wealthy Brahmin. He has a new ceremonial hall built next to the citadel. He shaves off his hair and beard, dresses in a rough antelope hide, smears his body with ghee and oil. And here he gives a description of religious sacrifices, which were common at that time. So when somebody would summon animals to be sacrificed in a ritual, and they would get their servants and workers to all participate in the cruel mistreatment and sacrifice of these animals, so mistreatment and killing of animals. And what he's saying here, so he says his bondservants, servants, and workers do their job under threat of punishment and danger, weeping and with tearful faces. So this is somebody who not only do they torment themselves by taking on ascetic practices, but they're also getting other people to engage in wrong livelihood and inappropriate conduct by harming and tormenting others. So while the specific example here seems a little bit overly specific, so aristocrat who takes on ascetic practices and then gets a bunch of people to commit animal sacrifice, it's like, well, that's a kind of excessively specific example. The important thing is to take the underlying principle. So it's somebody who both is living in a way which is unnecessarily self-harming, but also they're inflicting torment on the people around them, the sentient beings around them. They're doing things which lead to increased misery and suffering for other people as well. So don't get stuck on the specific example, but rather look at the principle. The principle is somebody who's tormenting themselves and also other sentient beings. And finally he says, and what person doesn't torment either themselves or others? Who is committed to the practice of not tormenting self or others, who lives without wishes in this very life, quenched, cooled, experiencing bliss, and who has become divine. And he says, it's when a Tathagata arises in the world, an Arhat, a fully awakened Buddha. And here it's the Buddha starts going into an actually quite lengthy explanation, which we find in a few places in the suttas, where it talks about, again, the Buddha arising in the world, and then someone going and becoming the Buddha's disciple and cultivating spiritual practice. So again, it begins, so a Buddha arises in the world, and somebody hears the Dhamma and goes to the Buddha and learns the Dhamma from the Buddha and begins practicing. And he gives the example of, so the person again becomes a monastic, so becomes a monk following the Buddha. They say they give up the 5 hindrances, they cultivate the 4 jhanas, and when their samadhi is well developed, then they direct their attention towards recollecting past lives. They extend it towards knowledge of rebirth, so understanding death and rebirth. And then with their mind in samadhi, then they immerse it towards direct it towards understanding how to end one's defilements. And he says, then one truly understands this is dukkha, this is its origin, this is its cessation, this is the practice that leads to its cessation. One understands these are the defilements, the origin of the defilements, the cessation of defilements, and the practice that leads to the cessation of defilements. And knowing and seeing like this, one's mind is freed from the defilements of sensuality, existence, and ignorance. And when one is liberated, then one knows that they are liberated. And one understands birth is ended, the spiritual journey has been completed, what had to be done has been done, there is no further existence here. And the Buddha says, this is called a person who neither mortifies themselves or others, who is committed to the practice of not tormenting themselves or others, who lives without wishes in this very life, quenched, cooled, experiencing bliss, one who has become divine. So the person who torments neither themselves or others is the person who takes on spiritual practice and practices thoroughly and completely all the way to full awakening. So we have these four kinds of people: the one who tortures themselves, the one who tortures others, the one who tortures both, and the person who resolves to give up torturing entirely, and therefore embarks on the spiritual path of completely purifying the mind of greed, hatred, and delusion. Because this is the only way to actually completely give up torment, both of self and other. So that's the end of the Buddha's instructions. So the sutta concludes with a response from the lay people. So it says, when the Buddha had spoken, the Brahmins and householders of Sala said to the Buddha, "Excellent, Sir Gautama, excellent." As if one was writing what was overturned, or revealing what was hidden, or pointing out the path to the lost, or lighting a lamp in the dark so people with clear eyes can see what's there. Sir Gautama has made the teaching clear in many ways. We go for refuge to Sir Gautama, to the Dhamma, and to the mendicant Sangha. From this day forth, may Sir Gautama remember us as lay followers who have gone for refuge for life. In other words, at the end of this discourse, then the people who were there were thoroughly convinced and decided to become Buddhists, to become followers of the Buddha. So at this time we can respect the sutta with 3 sadhus, and then I'll see if there's any questions. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And hello to the people joining in online. Hello to Maria, Bhumika, Gita, Rebecca, Jayanta, 552, Liesel, Nico, Sanjana, Sud, Christina, Ian, Niranjan, Gregory, Julie, Kumu, Edward, and Richard. Welcome to all of you. And let's see if there's any questions. So Niranjan says, Siddhartha became Buddha after knowing Four Noble Truths. Yes, that's correct. When talking about his own experience of awakening, the Buddha spoke about his awakening in a few different ways. But one of the ways he spoke about it was that it was through the direct perception of the Four Noble Truths, which is something he had not heard before. But he directly perceived the Four Noble Truths. And in directly perceiving it, then he relinquished his own defilements. He relinquished his own greed, hatred, and delusion, and therefore attained full awakening. So yes, that's one of the ways that the Buddha talks about it. The complete, direct, personal understanding of the Four Noble Truths is equivalent to full awakening. It's the same thing. And you had a question? Yeah, go ahead.
So thank you so much, Bhante. This sutta helps with the ongoing wish to understand cruelty. I noticed something came up when you were teaching about cruelty to others. I recalled an example of there's still sects even today that will, for ritual purposes, buy a whole cartload of chickens, and they'll just twirl the chicken around their head to take the sin away from them, and then they don't even use the meat. They just kill the chicken and toss it away. And so this empathetic distress arose, and this idea how can we save the chickens? This kind of movie in the head came up, and the idea, and then I just watched it played out like rounding them all up and keeping them away from the chickens. And then I heard what you said, what the Buddha said is, jailing people is a form of cruelty, like trying to control people is a form of cruelty, which is very insightful. So what would you recommend when these kind of, based on the sutta, what should I remember the most about this experience?
Well, I mean, both of those things. So first off, there actually are animal rescue groups who that's their focus. Their focus is on rescuing the chickens after these religious ceremonies and taking care of them. There's an animal rescue farm about an hour from here who that's kind of their main thing, because there's hundreds and hundreds of these mistreated chickens once a year. And most of them actually they don't die immediately. They're just kind of tossed in a refuse pile somewhere and left to die on their own. So these people go and they take the ones that are still alive and nurse them back to health and let them live a relatively normal chicken life for the rest of their natural lives. So if that interests you, you could actually look into supporting groups that do that sort of thing, or going and volunteering for periods of time for them. Similarly, the issue of criminal justice reform, that's another area of compassionate activity that you could look into ways of helping out, contributing in small ways or whatever you can in order to support that. So it's good to remember that compassion ideally manifests in action, so that it's not just a wish, but that we also actually do something. We actually do something to try to make the world a better place. So cultivating the wish is good, and then we also look to see what can I actually do about it. Is there something I can do? Even something small, like sending a token donation to one of these chicken rescue groups or criminal justice reform groups, is still, it's doing something to express your compassionate intention. Or volunteering for short periods of time is another way that you can do that. Yeah, it's worth doing.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up, my intention was to focus on the process that's arising in the mind related to cruelty. So the Buddha is saying that instead of doing these wrong livelihoods, we should cultivate the Buddhist path. That's the way that we don't torment ourselves and others?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, and there's some more questions online. Sud says, sometimes following the principles of the Eightfold Path seems painful. Is this wrong view? For example, not lying even when it is going to make you look bad, etc. Yes, that's wrong view. Because the truth is that when we do unwholesome deeds, then that is tormenting ourselves. So it's poisoning one's own mind. It's poisoning one's own heart. So it generates an inner torment. Whereas when one is committed to goodness, committed to morality, then one has the joy of knowing that one is blameless. And if others are criticizing you, then their criticism is ungrounded and therefore irrelevant. So yeah, it's true. Sometimes when we commit ourselves to doing the right thing, then sometimes other people will still criticize us, but that's just a reflection of their own narrow view. So one of the lines of the Dhammapada that I really adore is the Buddha says, no one escapes criticism. No matter what you do, somebody doesn't like it. You could be the most generous, compassionate saint in the entire world, committed solely to helping other people, and somebody will hate you for it. So we cannot base our choices on what other people think about it, but rather we should be basing our choices on what is in fact the most moral and appropriate. And our happiness should be based not on other people's opinions of us, but rather on the knowledge of our own goodness. Okay, and Christina says, did the audience become stream enters after the talk? It does not say in this sutta, so we don't know, but it doesn't appear to be so. There's several more questions online. So let's see. Niranjan says, Rahul became Arhat hearing the Rahulovada Sutta. I read it more than 20 times, but I didn't reach. Why? Well, Niranjan, that's actually a more complicated question, and it's also not directly related to this discourse, so I recommend bringing that to Monk Chat this evening. And there we'll have the time and space to talk about it in more detail. And Christina says, how about being a juror in a criminal case? Jury duty is mandatory where you have to produce a verdict. How to proceed in a wholesome way? Well, this is actually not hypothetical because recently I was called in for jury duty. So the first step is the jury selection process, in which it's handled differently in different courts, but usually the way they do it is that you have to answer a series of questions, the questions are meant to sort out who's actually going to be good for jury duty and who isn't. So in the questioning, I was actually quite clear. I said, as a Buddhist monk, it is against my moral code to imprison anyone. So regardless of whether the person is guilty or not, I will be morally obligated to say they're not guilty, because I cannot condone the punishment or imprisonment of another sentient being. And of course, I was not selected for jury duty, because if you say those sorts of things, you are immediately rejected. They only want people who will, in fact, put the guilty people in prison. They don't want people who will say, I'm letting everybody go free no matter what. Because, that is in fact what I would do. If I actually had been selected for jury duty, which they wouldn't select me, there's just no chance. But if I had been selected, I would have, in fact, been morally obligated to let the person go free. I could not imprison someone in good conscience. So that's what I recommend, is if you actually do feel, as I do, if you do feel that Buddhist practice prevents you from imprisoning others, then just say that when you're called in for jury duty. And odds are they won't select you. Usually they call in way more people than they need, because actually most people are not fit for jury duty. Okay, and that's the last question, so we can go ahead and conclude at this time with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you this evening for Monk Chat.